And the specific subdivision you want to look for, I believe, is subsection E. So in other words, it may have a state of emergency, but if it doesn't have an E after the penal code section, then it doesn't apply to landlords. So before landlords start increasing rents, even where they're allowed, like San Bernardino, Riverside, Orange County, go to the website and look it up and see if there's a state of emergency in effect that would prohibit them from doing increases of greater than 10%.
So no matter what duration of time the notice would be, 30-day or 60-day, you wouldn't be able to raise it more than 10% of the current.
In those jurisdictions, that's correct. Kris, you just said something that jogged my memory on something else. I'm glad you said it because your members are watching. The law changed a couple days ago. Laws change every day. The law changed a couple years ago on the amount of notice is required to give a rent increase. So it's no longer 30 or 60. If your increase is greater than 10%, it's a 90-day notice.
And that's for the entire state of California?
That's the entire state, right.
And that's important because with the amount of inflation that we've seen this last year, when we get these new CPI readouts come May, I imagine there's going to be an opportunity to raise it more than 10% in some areas. If you have a 5% base plus CPI, can't imagine CPI is not going to be, say, 5-6% in some of these locations. So now it's 90 days, and you may not even be able to increase it more than 10%, depending on if there's some special state of emergency in the city of which you own.
Correct. And also, if you're under statewide rent control, it doesn't matter. The maximum is 10%, no matter what CPI is. You can have a 6% CPI plus a 5% base, which would be 11%, but you're maxed out at 10 under statewide rent stabilization.
Oh, so that's interesting. So and for the viewers, the reason why Mike continues to say if you're under statewide is because there's certain types of properties like single family homes, for example, that are not under statewide rent control. And so there's certain types of real estate that are not under statewide. For those of you that are watching, you own multifamily, you're under statewide rent control unless your building was built within the last 15 years.
Correct.
And so basically for everyone watching, you cannot raise your rents more than 10%.
Correct, unless you're exempted by statewide for some reason.
Wow, this is this is all news. Now, so what about substantial improvement? I realize in LA County, that's not going to be allowed, but San Bernardino County, Riverside, Orange County, are you aware of any stipulations that say you cannot do substantial, ask tenants to vacate to do substantial improvements?
No, essentially, once you get outside of LA County, with one small exception, Santa Ana in Orange County has now got rent control and just cause eviction. But with putting that exception aside, once you get outside of LA County in Southern California, substantial improvement or substantial renovation is what it's called. There's no problem doing that. Before I get started, what I'm going to do, Kris, is share my screen. And I've got a slideshow that I'm going to use to walk people through it. And I want to be very direct up front. We're going to blow through the majority of it because there's so much that is taking place or has taken place and is in the process of taking place that I don't have time to do a deep dive on any of it in particular. We're also going to talk about some evolving trends and themes that we're seeing because you'll see those playing out in the bigger picture in the sense that you'll see where the laws are starting to go. And sometimes where a law gets passed and you're scratching your head going, why would they pass that? When you start to see these themes, you start to understand why. So having said that, let me share my screen real quick. So I'm going to put it on this screen first. Can you see my screen, Kris?
We can.
Okay. So the reason I'm putting this screen first is there's an email address right there. I want to give that to your members. If they have questions or they'd like a copy of these slides, I'm happy to send it to them. Just email me there and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. All right, so legislator overview. As everybody knows, Governor Newsom dodged a bullet. He stayed out of, the recall effort was unsuccessful. And so he remains in office. No surprise, he literally spent twice as much money. He spent $83 million while the combined efforts of everybody that was opposing him were $45 million. So he doubled their money and stayed in office. Democrats currently enjoy a supermajority, which means 75% or better in both houses. And that's a real problem. In fact, right now, their numbers are so great that in both houses, they need no Republican support whatsoever to get a bill passed, and they don't have to work with any of the Republicans to prevent a bill that they don't like from passing. So we're really kind of in a dire situation up in Sacramento as far as being a housing provider is concerned. But a supermajority makes it very easy for them to pass more taxes, which they're doing, pass laws with urgency clauses, which means they can go into effect immediately, and to place measures on the ballot with absolutely no Republican support. 2022, everybody knows this is a primary election year, so it's very important. I really don't see any changes taking place even after the election. You'll see on there I have a redistricting, I have a headline redistricting. Last year, we did some redistricting numbers based on the latest census. And so that can also impact the vote, but I don't think it's going to. I think if anything, we're going to see more Democrats in the legislative makeup in Sacramento after the 2022 election. I will say that the new chairman of the housing committee is Buffy Wicks, and she is no friend at all to housing providers. And she has publicly stated now that it's her goal not only to get more Democrats in Sacramento, but to put more Democrats on the housing committee. So we're looking at a potentially ugly year for 2022. And now we'll move on to the legislative overview. 2,226 bills were introduced. A lot of them never go anywhere, and that's the case here, but approximately 835 of them made it to the governor's desk. 770 were signed, 66 were vetoed, and approximately 43 went to the governor that affect housing. 40 of those were signed, 3 of them were vetoed. I'm not going to go into every single bill that touched housing because a lot of them are not significant and they'd be a waste of time. We will talk about the ones that impact the landlords directly. All right, the bills that failed. First of all, let's talk about that real quick. Why do we care what bills failed? Why am I bringing it up? The importance of the bills that failed is, well, there's 2 reasons mainly. One is we work on a 2-year legislative session. So a bill that failed last year can come back this year and come back on it. And in fact, several of them have. The second and probably more important reason we care about the bills that failed is they give you a good sense of what the themes are that are evolving, what housing is trying to do, what the legislators in the housing committee are trying to do. So the ones that are most important are here on this screen. AB 1487, that was a homelessness prevention fund. And over the last decade, everybody's heard that buzz phrase, homelessness. That's changing, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But that homelessness prevention fund did a lot of things, but mainly what it did was it was providing free eviction attorneys to anybody facing an eviction. Now, down here in LA County, that's old news. They've been dealing with the Shriver Project for the last decade, but for counties outside of LA that have never had this problem that we face with these free attorneys, that law, had it passed, would have given every tenant a free attorney when they're facing an eviction. So luckily that did not pass. I anticipate that you'll see that coming back. We haven't seen it yet that I'm aware of for 2022, but it will be there. AB 899 and AB 1199, both by Gibson. These were kind of combined bills. Basically, what he's trying to do is get the corporate owners behind LLCs and corporations to have to not only register with the Secretary of State, but to pay an excise tax of 25% on their properties. And his stated reason for this is that you have these huge companies like Blackstone that beginning in 2008, when we had the foreclosure meltdown, they came in and started buying all these single family homes. And Gibson's stated reason for wanting this information is because he claims that it's preventing the locals in those areas from buying housing. And so he wants to know who these people are. Well, why does he want to know that? Well, 1, he wants to tax them. And 2, he wants to be able to put the face of some big corporation on all of the anti-corporation housing laws that they want to pass. Hey, look, Blackstone's doing this. We need a law. Blackstone's doing this. It's all these greedy corporations that we're trying to stop. The reality is the laws don't stop the corporations. They impact the small mom and pops more than anything. But those 2 failed as well, thankfully, but we'll see they're coming back. AB 1188, Buffy Wicks attempted to do a county and a city rent registration, which failed. She's brought that back. She's brought that laws very similar to that multiple times now, and they keep failing, and she's going to keep continuing that. And SB 633, Limon, delivery of documents to guarantors. This one failed. I'll explain it in a second. I haven't seen it come back this year. I'm not too concerned about it. But essentially what it said is if you're a landlord and you're going to use a cosigner, you have to notify, in addition to the cosigning agreement, you have to notify them. You would have had to give them an additional document explaining to them that they're on the hook for the rent if the tenant doesn't pay. And it would have had to have been done in their primary language, something other than English. So that failed. And then SB 854, the Ellis Act prohibition, for anybody who's watching that doesn't already know what the Ellis Act is. The Ellis Act is a law that allows a landlord to go out of business. So essentially, if you ever get to a point where, let's say you had a single family home as one example, and you wanted to put your mom in it, you could take that home off the market. And even if it was covered by rent or just cause evictions, you could kick out the tenant and put your mom in it just by going out of business. And for the past 10 years, we've had at least 8 attempts to take Ellis Act off the books, and each one has failed. In fact, even in 2022, they attempted to bring it back, and it just failed yesterday. So I don't think that they'll give up on that, but it did fail for 2022. So right now, we're not facing an Ellis Act prohibition. But I will tell your listeners right now, Ellis Act is one of the major laws that is prohibited under most of these COVID moratoriums, like LA County.